Thank you for coming. The hearing of the Committee on Finance is hereby called to order. Chair would like to recognize and acknowledge the presence of our distinguished Senate President, Senate President Drilon. Good morning, sir. Chair would also like to acknowledge the presence of the DBCC family headed by Secretary Abad, Secretary Purisima, Secretary Balisacan, Governor Detango, Deputy Governor Gunigundo, Commissioner Inares, as well as Treasurer De Leon. Mr. Secretary Abad, may we know the order of your presentation this morning? Okay. Unless the good Senate President wishes to make some remarks, kung wala po, Secretary Abad, you are recognized. You may begin, sir.
With the permission of the Chair, good morning. Honorable Senator Jesus Cudero, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Finance, the Honorable Senate President Franklin Drilon, and the rest of the members of the committee who are still to come. It is the privilege of the Department of Budget and Coordination Committee, Mr. Chairman, to present to you the financial blueprint of the Aquino administration for fiscal year 2015. I wish to introduce to you the members of the DBCC in the order of their presentations today on the 2015 budget. NEDA Director General R.C. Balisacan will present an overview of the Philippines' economic performance so far, growth prospects, and internal and external macroeconomic challenges for 2014 to 2016. Bangko Sentral Governor Armando Detango will present the monetary, financial, and external developments in our outlook for 2014 and 2015. Finance Secretary Cesar Purisima will present our fiscal and revenue collection performance so far, as well as our targets for fiscal year 2015. Finally, as DBM Secretary and as Chairman of the DBCC, I will present, Mr. Chairman, the overview of the proposed National Expenditure Plan for 2015, its underlying principles and key investments we are making for 2015. Your Honors, as President Aquino said in his budget message, we are now discussing the proposed budget for 2015 in a truly remarkable time. In the 4 years that passed, our country has achieved unprecedented feats, remarkable economic growth, the renewed confidence by the investing public in our country, the landmark peace agreement on the Bangsamoro, and of course, with your support in Congress, the enactment of sin tax reform law and the Reproductive Health Act. These and many more were made possible because our people themselves chose not to let the status quo prevail, but to embark with us, with government, to pursue reform. Certainly, our work is not yet done. Our last 2 remaining years in office must be focused on addressing 2 key challenges. First, how do we sustain our growth and make it truly felt by the people? Second, how do we sustain and intensify the reforms we have already rolled out? This proposed budget for 2015, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, addresses these 2 grand challenges. First, on the challenge of inclusive development. Our remarkable growth must translate into real and tangible benefits for the people, especially the poor. So far, poverty incidence has been reduced to 24.9% of Filipinos in the first semester of 2013 from 28.6% in the same period of 2009. While this shows that government interventions have gradually become effective in reducing poverty, this must be intensified to achieve inclusive and sustained development. This is why this proposed budget for 2015 was built around one simple idea, that regardless of birth, gender, and geography, everyone has a fair shot at opportunities this thriving nation can offer. We have dramatically reshaped the way the budget is distributed. In 2005, the combined share of social and economic services was a mere 45.3%. For 2015, these premier sectors now take up a combined 64% of the total budget. Through reforms, most notably the Budget Priorities Framework, we are ensuring that the budget has both a sectoral and spatial focus. In other words, to ensure that public funds go not only to our priority programs for poverty reduction and economic expansion, but also on priority localities where the poor are and where we must create more opportunities. While we increase public spending, we must also make sure that we are not putting our people under more indebtedness. Our efforts to put our fiscal house have contributed to the renewed confidence in our economy, most eloquently expressed by our investment grade ratings. On the second challenge, good governance reforms must be sustained and made irreversible, especially in the budget process. Through reforms, we continue to ensure that government spends within its means, on the right priorities, and with measurable results. Moreover, the increased public clamor for reform only tells us that we should continue empowering citizens through increased transparency and accountability, and most of all, wider avenues for their participation in the budget process. With this, the 2015 proposed budget intensifies reforms that give citizens a greater voice in how their taxes are allocated and spent. Through grassroots participatory budgeting, local communities and civil society organizations in 1,225 cities and municipalities have contributed to the shaping of this budget. This is the opposite of pork. Pork makes people dependent on political patrons. Grassroots participatory budgeting empowers people to say how the national budget should be spent. The 2015 proposed budget also intensifies government's accountability for delivering tangible and measurable results through public spending. For the 2014 budget, we are thankful that Congress supported the adoption of Performance-Informed Budgeting, or PIB, a major reform that links each peso with the performance targets of each government agency. For the 2015 budget, we are taking PIB a notch higher. By reflecting outcome indicators, the people through Congress are empowered to hold each agency accountable for the outcomes, the end results of their actions. At the end of the day, no matter how well we design our interventions and how sharp we target our beneficiaries, this would be meaningless if these are not felt by our people in an immediate and meaningful manner. This is why we continue to implement reforms for faster spending and more effective service delivery. The GAA has released document regime, the disaggregation of the budget, into greater detail, the implementation of procurement innovations, among other reforms. In addition to this, we also propose key policy reforms to Congress that seek to encourage agencies to use their budgets in a timely manner, to spend or lose it. The first is the reapplication of the one-year validity of appropriations. We believe that this policy regime discourages agencies from carrying over their budgets and postponing the implementation of programs and projects to the following year. The second is a clearer definition of savings and augmentation consistent with the Constitution to provide a more realistic and responsive timetable for the use of savings. In the last 4 years, we have shown how good governance translates to good economics. Honorable members of this committee, through the 2015 budget, we intensify our journey towards inclusive and sustained development through sustained and irreversible good governance reforms. With this, honorable members of this august committee, thank you, and I ask Secretary Balisacan be recognized for his presentation. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Abad. Before I recognize Secretary Balisacan, Chair would like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Binay. Secretary Balisacan, you're recognized, sir. You may proceed, and good morning.
Senate President Franklin D. Leon, Finance Committee Chairman Jesus Escudero, Senator Nancy Binay, colleagues in the government, good morning. On behalf of the DBCC, I am pleased to present the recent Philippine economic performance as well as growth targets for the year and for 2015. We'll also identify the risks that we think may impact on our economy in the short to medium term, as well as the opportunities for growth. Recently, the Philippine economy has become one of the bright spots in the Asian region. We had 9 consecutive quarters of higher than average GDP growth rate. The full year growth rates in 2012 at 6.8% in 2013 and in 2013 at 7.2% were even higher than we have targeted. This growth was achieved despite the uncertain global environment and a series of natural disasters that afflicted the country. Not only is the growth higher, Mr. Chairman, there are indications that we are heading towards a higher and more sustainable growth path. The chart you see on screen shows the different dimensions of the growth experience. First, looking at the growth rate over time. During the 1999 to 2000, real GDP grew by 3.7% on the average. We have seen since then an acceleration of the growth rate to 4.6% for the years 2001 to 2005 and 5.0% during the years 2006 to 2010. For the years 2011 to 2013, we witnessed an even higher average growth rate of 5.9%. In 2013, the growth rate was 7.2%. So clearly, you see that the economy accelerating in recent years. The other dimensions, dimension is the source of the growth. On the supply side, the services sector still takes the lion's share of the economic growth. But industry, particularly manufacturing, is increasingly becoming a major growth driver. In 2013, more than 40% of the 7.2% growth was contributed by industry, where more than 3/4 was due to the acceleration of manufacturing activities. On the demand side, although household spending continued to have the largest contribution to GDP, investment is increasingly becoming a major driver of growth. As already noted, the Philippine economy has been able to weather the global slowdown, attesting to its ability to draw on the internal sources of growth. With the eventual recovery of advanced economies, the prospects for future growth can only get better. The country's growth has been supported by strong macroeconomic fundamentals, which fueled positive expectations of businesses and households. This is characterized by low and stable inflation, favorable interest rates, sustainable fiscal and external positions, and a stable financial sector. In the first quarter of 2014, while the country's economic growth moderated to 5.7% from a high of 7.7% in the same period in 2013, the country continued to be one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. The moderate first quarter growth was expected as the country was still recovering from the hails of devastation brought about by Typhoon Yolanda in the last quarter of 2013. Moreover, reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts are yet to gain traction. Despite the slowdown in the first quarter, we are confident that the full-year growth target of 6.5 to 7.5% will be achieved. The country's positive outlook for 2014 is also supported by recent indicators. For instance, the latest result of the Monthly Integrated Survey of Selected Industries, or MISI, points out that manufacturing is likely to remain as a major growth driver. Double-digit growth rate in manufacturing output was sustained in June 2014, although slightly lower than in the previous month. Overall, the production indices from April to June point to a stronger manufacturing performance in the second quarter of the year. Year-to-date equivalent expansion of manufacturing output grew by an average of 8.6% in terms of volume and 7.5% in terms of value. In addition, merchandise exports accelerated at a faster pace in June 2014 as it grew by 21.3% to $5.4 billion US dollars from $4.5 billion US dollars in the same period in 2013, largely driven by higher outward sales of manufacturers, mineral products, total agro-based products, and forest products. For the first half of 2014, total exports rose by 8.3% to $29.8 billion from $27.5 billion in the comparable period in 2013. In terms of the 3-month moving average growth, exports gathered speed in June 2014 and registered higher growth trend following better performances of both electronics and non-electronic segments. However, the generation of more decent, productive, and high-quality employment that provides adequate income for the Filipino workers continues to be a major challenge. The recent results of the labor force survey show that both unemployment and underemployment rates have remained high. While the quality of employment has been improving, as can be seen from the rising share of more remunerative wage and salaried workers in the total number of employed workers, the increases in the number of productive employment opportunities have not been enough to both absorb the new entrants to the fast-growing labor force and reduce the huge stock of the unemployed and the underemployed workers. In the April 2014 labor force survey round, the economy generated 1.7 million employment. Total employment in April 2014 reached 38.7 million, 4.5% higher than the 37 million level of employment in the same period in 2013. All major sectors, agriculture, industry, and services, posted employment gains. This broad-based growth in employment provides a good indicator of the country's economic performance in the second quarter of 2014. On a positive note, the 4 consecutive quarters of higher than 7% growth in real GDP from the second half of 2012 to the first half of 2013 translates to a significant reduction in poverty incidence during the period. Poverty incidence, or the proportion of population deemed poor among Filipinos, registered at a 3.0 percentage point drop, coming from 27.9% in the first semester of 2012 to 24.9% in the first semester of 2013. This translates to about 2.5 million people lifted out of poverty. Meanwhile, the proportion of Filipinos in extreme poverty also posted strong declines during the period, from 13.4% to 10.7% during the same period. Notwithstanding this accomplishment, we know that we need to further accelerate poverty reduction, thereby fulfilling the President's social contract of inclusive growth. We believe, Mr. Chairman, that we'll be able to keep the momentum of achieving growth and poverty reduction by addressing the lessons we have learned these past 3 years. These have been considered in the updating of the Philippine Development Plan. Constraints faced by the poor shall be specifically addressed by integrating spatial and sectoral focus in the development strategies. In terms of reducing and managing disaster risk, a comprehensive strategy will be pursued covering aspects of preparedness, prevention and mitigation, income diversification, social protection and insurance to mitigate effects of disasters. Government will continue to enhance efforts to improve competitiveness by investing in infrastructure and human capital development and improving regulatory environment to support investment and innovation. Fiscal prudence will continue to be observed, as well as the commitment to maintain sound macroeconomic fundamentals. And finally, governance reforms will remain a priority, and this will focus on transparency and accountability. Addressing the specific constraints faced by the poor requires consideration of geophysical characteristics. We have categorized the provinces into 3 depending on the number of poor, proportion of the poor, and incidence of natural disasters in the province. In each category, we have a focus and a specific strategy. These are discussed in detail in the Philippine Philippine Development Plan midterm update. The updated PDP identifies 6 key sectors that have the potential to generate high-quality employment for Filipinos. These are manufacturing, agribusiness, tourism, IT business process management, logistics, and construction. Strategic plans and roadmaps are developed to support growth in each of these sectors, as shown in this slide. The proposed 2015 budget strives to support the key strategies in the updated PDP with the end view of massively generating high-quality employment for Filipinos and significantly reducing poverty. Although prospects in the next 3 quarters remain upbeat, the government remains on guard to provide the necessary measures to mitigate, if not prevent, the effects of realized risks. The external risks include tapering of the United States quantitative easing program, slowdown large emerging economies, particularly China and India, tightening fiscal policy stance in Japan, uncertainty of growth recovery in the euro area, and geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine region. On the demand front, the risks include natural disasters such as typhoons, prolonged monsoon rains, the El Nino, now with 70% probability, possible spikes in commodity prices like, for example, petroleum, power, and food, delays in infrastructure and reconstruction projects, destructive coconut scale insect infestation, and the port logistic problems induced by truck ban. We have also taken into account the monetary and external sectors as shown on the slide. This will be discussed later by our colleague, Governor Tetangco Jr. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I would like to reiterate the socioeconomic targets indicated in the Philippine Development Plan midterm update. GDP to grow by 6.5% to 7.5% in 2014, 7 to 8% in 2015, and 7.5% to 8.5% in 2016. Unemployment rate to decline from 7% in 2013 to 6.5% to 6.7% in 2016. And for income poverty to be reduced to 18 to 20% by 2016. We are confident that this will be met with the timely passage of the budget that will enable the executive to implement the strategies in the PDP midterm update. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Balisacan. Chair would like to recognize and acknowledge the presence of our Assistant Minority Floor Leader, Senator Soto. Secretary Abad, who's next?
Mr. Chairman, can we recognize the BSP Governor Sai Tetangco to make his presentation?
Governor Tetangco, you're recognized, sir. You may proceed. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Francis Escudero, the Honorable Senate President, Franklin Drilon, the Honorable Minority Leader, Senator Vic Soto, and the Honorable Senator Nancy Binay. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As a resource institution of the DBCC, the BSP is pleased to provide the committee with an update on the emerging trends in the monetary, external, and financial sectors of the economy, as well as to explain the overall thinking behind the macroeconomic assumptions underlying the 2015 budget. Let me highlight the key themes of the BSP presentation. First, the BSP believes that the macroeconomic fundamentals remain strong. While growth appeared to have moderated in the first quarter, and we now see some upside pressures to inflation, the underlying narrative of the Philippine economy remains the same. Mr. Chairman, the economy continues to expand above the historical average. We also expect inflation to remain within the government's target range in 2014 as well as in 2015, supported by well-calibrated monetary policy settings. Second, we acknowledge that the economy faces challenges, but we believe that we can stay the course. Risks from the external environment, such as uncertainty surrounding monetary policy normalization abroad, economic slowdown in some emerging economies, and geopolitical unrest could impact the Philippine economy. In the domestic front, natural calamities and possible power outages could exact a toll on both growth and prices. And these risks were discussed earlier by Secretary Balisacan. While previous BSP measures are still working their way into the system, liquidity growth remains strong, potentially leading to price pressures and financial imbalances. However, we believe policymakers have sufficient policy space to counter these risks. Well-directed fiscal spending could support growth. Timely implementation of supply-side measures would also help keep prices manageable. In the monetary sector, the BSP has already preemptively adjusted some of its tools to guard against potential risks to price and financial stability. The BSP remains prepared to implement further policy actions as needed to prevent any potential buildup in inflation expectations and financial imbalances. Finally, let me point out that the way forward necessitates consolidating recent gains and pursuing reforms to boost the economy's flexibility and our productivity. Mr. Chairman, any economic story is never of a straight line. There could be bumps and kinks as we move forward, but we can and we will stay the course. To this end, the BSP remains steadfast in our commitment to prudent monetary policy and purposeful reforms in the financial system. For a better appreciation of the likely path of the economy going forward, let me briefly discuss where we stand at the moment and how this current position compares with where we have been over the past decade. The slide shows that one, real GDP growth remains resilient and is driven by strong domestic demand. Two, effective monetary policy has contributed to delivering within target inflation. Three, modest fiscal deficit ensures effective government spending and sustainability to pay debt. Four, ample liquidity has continued to support economic activity. Five, a sound and stable banking system aided by strong prudential supervision and regulation has resulted in the efficient intermediation of funds and management of risk. And six, a strong external position backed by comfortable foreign exchange reserves and prudent external debt management has provided buffers against external vulnerabilities. In the next slides, I shall provide some details to describe the thinking behind the policies that help bring about these results. But at the outset, let me say that there were no quick and easy fixes behind what we have achieved thus far. The transformation of the Philippine economy is the result of a long history of structural reforms, along with disciplined macroeconomic management and improvements in governance. The slide lists these reforms, the latest of which is the liberalized entry of foreign banks in the Philippines, which we expect will facilitate the entry of more foreign direct investments in the country. And we'd like to thank the members of the Senate, particularly the Committee on Banks, for the speedy passage of this bill. Earlier, Secretary Balisacan spoke at length about the real GDP growth. Now, let me just add that even as output growth has moderated in the first quarter, we expect strong domestic demand to hold up. Household consumption is expected to remain steady on the demand side, and growth in services is expected to be sustained. 2013 is the fifth consecutive year that inflation had fallen within the government's inflation target range. In 2013, year-on-year headline inflation averaged 3%, the low end of the government's inflation target range of 3 to 5% for the year. For 2014, inflation is seen to still fall within the government's target range of 3 to 5%, albeit above the middle of the target range, with pressures emanating mostly from the supply side. Inflation averaged 4.3% for the period January to July 2014. Now, for 2015, the national government has adopted a lower inflation target range of 2 to 4%, consistent with the expected disinflationary path. Our expectation is that inflation will be within this target range for next year. BSP's policy actions are always guided by our primary mandate of price and financial stability that is supportive of economic growth. Over the last 4 monetary policy meetings of the Monetary Board, morning, Senator Recto, the BSP adopted a series of policy actions to 1. Contain domestic liquidity. 2. Address possible financial stability pressures coming from such excessive liquidity. 3. Guide inflation expectations. And 4. Preemptively soften possible second-round effects as price pressures from the supply side have increased. So far, these measures, which include tightening reserve requirements, increasing the SDA rate, and raising the RRP or the policy rate, have been effective in reining in inflation expectations and containing frothy financial market behavior. The BSP also believes that the Philippine economy remains resilient to accommodate recent tightening of monetary policy. We will continue to coordinate with other government agencies to address pressures from the supply side, including the timely importation of certain food products and tighter price monitoring to prevent speculative trading, and that could help ease price pressures. Now, on credit conditions, these remain supportive of economic growth. The committee would be pleased to note that the bulk of bank loans has gone to the productive sectors of the economy, including electricity, gas and water, trade, transportation, storage and communication, real estate, renting and business services, as well as manufacturing. On the banking system, the key banking system indicators demonstrate the soundness of Philippine banks, which is one of the reasons credit continues to grow at a healthy pace. The Philippine banking system is characterized by solid asset growth, improving quality of loans and assets, continued profitability, and strong capitalization that are above international norms. Our banks have therefore continued to perform their central roles of efficiently channeling funds to productive uses, as well as managing financial risks. Moving on to the external sector, the current account continued to perform well during due to resilient overseas Filipino remittances, rising BPO revenues, and increased tourist receipts. Cash remittances from OFWs coursed through banks for the period January-June 2014 reached $11.4 billion, higher by 5.8% compared to the same period a year ago. The country's balance of payments position recorded a deficit of $4.5 billion in Q1 2014. However, the deficit in Q1 2014 reflected the net outflows of portfolio and other investments amid the ongoing uncertainty in the pace of the U.S. Federal Reserve's normalization of monetary policy. Recent data on capital flows indicate a gradual return of foreign investments and subsequent improvement in the external payments position. On the gross international reserves, the country's GIR stood at $81 billion as of end July 2014, adequate to cover 11 months' worth of imports of goods and payments of services and income. That level is also equivalent to 7.7 times the country's short-term external debt based on original maturity and 5.7 times based on residual maturity. This shows, Mr. Chairman, that we have a healthy external liquidity position. On the exchange rate, the peso has maintained its relative competitiveness as it moved broadly in line with neighbors in the region. The continued positive outlook for the Philippines, credit rating upgrades, and sustained dollar inflows have provided support to the peso. Now, having gone through a review of emerging trends in key macroeconomic indicators, what do all this mean for the macroeconomic assumptions used in the budget process? First, inflation is within target. The year-to-date inflation is expected to be within the 3 to 5% target range for 2014, while 2015 inflation is seen to fall within the 2 to 4% target range. The balance of risk to the inflation outlook continues to be tilted slightly towards the upside, with price pressures that could emanate from higher food prices, shorter volatility in international oil prices, and pending petitions for adjustments in power rates. So we need to closely monitor the movement in prices, Mr. Chairman. Second, for oil prices, the per barrel price of Dubai is likely to trade between 100 to 110 US dollars per barrel in 2014, and between 90 and 110 US dollars per barrel in 2015. The U.S. Energy Information Administration expects oil production to outpace oil consumption over the next 2 years, resulting in generally stable oil prices. However, geopolitical tensions in the Russia-Ukraine region, and more recently in Iraq, pose considerable risks to oil price stability. Nonetheless, any resulting volatility in oil prices could be transitory in nature, as tensions would likely be contained and upside pressures could be tempered by sufficient supply. Third, in the foreign exchange market, the peso-US dollar rate is expected to remain broadly steady against the US dollar. On the one hand, the scaling back of the U.S. Federal Reserve's asset purchases and the possibility that the U.S. Fed would begin to raise interest rates next year would put additional pressure on currencies in emerging markets, including the Philippines. In addition, an increase in dollar requirements due to anticipated stronger import growth as the domestic economy continues to expand could also affect the peso. And then on the other hand, the sustained surplus, particularly in the current account, should provide support to the local currency. Fourth, in the near term, rates on government-issued papers are expected to remain relatively low. Assumptions for the 364-day T-bill rate are set at 1.5 to 4% for 2014 and 2 to 4% for 2015. The trend in the T-bill rate will continue to be influenced by developments in the fiscal position of the national government and the BSP's policy stance, as well as liquidity conditions in the economy. Fifth, the trend in foreign interest rates will continue to be driven by policy actions undertaken by major central banks in response to the developments concerning the global economy. A slowdown in asset purchases by the U.S. Fed and the expected increase in the U.S. Fed funds rate next year would lead to higher foreign interest rates. Recent data, however,